In a hidden kingdom, nestled between golden mountains and unwavering traditions, Zuberi was born, a prince surrounded by luxury, yet stifled by choices he never made. Destined to marry someone he barely knew and inherit a throne he never asked for, his heart yearned for something grander, or perhaps something simpler: true love. Tired of living as a pawn on a royal chessboard, Zuberi decides to abandon everything: the palace, the servants, the title, and embarks on an unexpected journey to the most chaotic city in the world, New York. But what he didn't expect was that amidst honking horns, fast food, and cramped apartments, he would find a woman who would change his life and make him question what truly matters more: a crown on his head or love in his heart. The prince who didn't want a throne. In the heart of the Ngabo kingdom, surrounded by lush green mountains and waterfalls whispering ancient stories, lived young Prince Zuberi. From birth, he was raised as a symbol of honor, power, and the continuity of the royal lineage. He was educated by the wisest, dressed by the most talented, and served by the most loyal. His life was, in everyone's eyes, perfect. But what no one saw was the emptiness growing within him. While his parents prided themselves on his discipline and elegance, Zuberi felt like a bird in a golden cage. Every step, every word, every gesture, everything was rehearsed. He knew exactly what he was supposed to do, but he no longer knew what he wanted to feel. The last straw came on his 25th birthday. The palace's main hall was covered in flowers, embroidered fabrics, and banners bearing the royal family's emblem. All the ministers, dukes, and tribal chiefs were gathered. Drums echoed in the background as dancers celebrated. Zuberi, wearing a red and gold ceremonial robe, could barely breathe. By his side, sitting with an impeccable smile, was Ayo, the woman chosen to be his wife. They had only seen each other 3 times. Their conversations were limited to formal phrases and questions about the weather. Still, the wedding was already set for 3 months from then. Zuberi's father, King Jabari, raised a crystal goblet and announced, "Today we celebrate not only the birth of my son, but the beginning of a new era. The future king of Ngabo is ready to take his next step." Everyone applauded. Zuberi merely offered a polite smile, but inside, his heart screamed. That night, as everyone feasted and danced under the African moonlight, Zuberi slipped out of the hall. He climbed to the top of the palace wall and gazed at the horizon. Outside, beyond the kingdom's borders, there was a world he didn't know. A world where people could choose whom to marry, where no one expected you to be perfect just because you were born into royalty. Just then, he heard footsteps. It was Malik, his best friend and advisor since childhood. Unlike the other servants, Malik wasn't afraid to speak the truth. "Running away from your own party?" he joked, sitting beside the prince. "Running away from my own life," Zuberi replied, his eyes fixed on the darkness. There was a long silence between the two. Malik was the only one to whom Zuberi had dared to confess what he felt. And there, under the stars, he said, "I don't want to be king, at least not this way. I want to know who I am outside these walls. I want to love someone who loves me, even if I have nothing to offer but myself." Malik looked at him seriously. "Then go. The world is vast, my friend, and only those who dare to leave their castle can find what truly matters." In the early hours of that morning, Zuberi made the decision that would change everything. He wouldn't ask permission. He wouldn't leave a note. He just wanted to be an ordinary man, for a while. And so, in the silent dawn, a prince closed the palace door, put on simple clothes, and set off into the unknown. His destination? The city where anything is possible, New York. 2. A leap of faith, from the kingdom of Ngabo to New York. Zuberi had never flown on a plane, at least not on a commercial flight. Whenever he had to travel, it was on private royal family jets, with entourages, butlers, and armed security. But now, sitting in the middle row of a crowded plane bound for the United States, he felt something he had never experienced before: freedom and a slight dread. He wore a worn-out baseball cap, dark sunglasses, and a simple backpack. Beside him, Malik bit his nails, wary of his friend's impulsive decision. "It's not too late to go back, you know. We can pretend it was just a passing fit," he whispered, already regretting embarking on that madness. Zuberi smiled, lighter than ever. "For the first time, I'm doing something that's just for me. For that alone, it's already worth it." Upon landing in New York, they were greeted by a whirlwind of sounds, honking, voices, and smells that contrasted with the refined silence of the palace. Everything was fast, confusing, and a little aggressive, but strangely alive. Queens would be their new home, a multicultural, bustling neighborhood, far from the glamour of famous avenues. Zuberi chose the place on purpose. He wanted to get lost in the crowd, to live like any other young person who works, studies, and pursues their own dreams. They found a small two-room apartment rented by a Dominican man named Mr. Herrera, who, seeing Zuberi's formal way of speaking, laughed loudly and commented, "Here, no one's a prince, my friend. Either you pay the rent on time, or you go back to your castle." The apartment had peeling walls, a temperamental shower, and windows that creaked when opened, but Zuberi looked at it with enchantment. It was ugly, it was simple, and it was his. In the first few days, everything seemed like a movie. Zuberi tried to understand how the subway worked, got lost on the streets, bought strange foods at the market, and laughed at himself when he tried to use the microwave. "This is more complicated than royal politics," he said, looking confused at a package of frozen lasagna. With Malik's help, they soon found work at a fast food restaurant. Zuberi introduced himself as a foreign student looking for experience. No one doubted him. After all, there were thousands like him in New York, dreamers with accents and mysterious stories. Working at the fast food place was a reality shock. He had to clean the floors, fry hamburgers, endure grumpy customers, and sometimes listen to the impatient manager's shouts. But, curiously, he felt happy. For the first time, he felt that every effort had a purpose. There were no red carpets, but there was sweat, genuine laughter, and small daily victories. One muggy afternoon, as he collected dirty trays, Zuberi heard a soft voice behind him. "Excuse me, you dropped this." Turning, he saw a young woman with sweet eyes, hair tied in a messy bun, and a waitress uniform. She was holding a small notebook he hadn't even realized he'd dropped. "Thank you," he mumbled, a little embarrassed. "Rachel," she said, extending her hand. Zach," he quickly corrected himself, remembering he needed to hide his identity. She smiled. "Welcome to the club of those who sweat for minimum wage." And so it was, in a simple encounter, on an ordinary day, that Zuberi felt his heart beat differently. There were no fireworks, no celestial bells. But there was something in Rachel's eyes that completely disarmed him. The Prince of Ngabo was beginning to discover the value of small things. And without knowing it, he had just taken the first step towards the love he so desperately sought. An apartment, a dream, and a broom. The apartment in Queens wasn't exactly a magazine dream. The stained walls told stories of harsh winters and stuffy summers. The kitchen sink stubbornly dripped, and the inherited sofa looked like it had survived 3 generations of tenants. But for Zuberi, it was a palace of freedom. The first night was magical, not for the comfort, but for the absence of formalities. No servants opening the door, no silent dinners at overly long tables, just him, Malik, a cold pizza, and the city's noise outside. "You know, Malik, this is real life," he said, biting into a generous slice of pepperoni. "Real life tastes like industrial sauce and a deflated mattress. But okay, I'll pretend I'm thrilled," Malik replied, rolling his eyes. Soon, the two settled into their new routine. They woke up early, had breakfast with cheap cereal, and took the subway to the diner. At the end of their shift, they returned exhausted, smelling of oil and grease, but with a sense of accomplishment. Zuberi had a quiet ritual every night. As soon as he arrived, he'd grab the broom from the closet, an old companion with a crooked handle, and sweep the apartment floor. Not because it was dirty, but because it connected him to the simplicity he sought. Every speck of dust seemed like a piece of his old self being swept away. While sweeping, he thought of Rachel. Since their first meeting, she hadn't left his mind. There was something about that girl, a firmness in her gaze, a practical way of seeing the world, which contrasted with the delicacy of her smile. They talked every day during breaks. Rachel told him about nursing school, about her younger siblings and widowed father, about how she wanted to give her family a better life. "I don't want to be rich," she once said. "I just want to have options, you know, to be able to choose my own path like normal people." Zuberi swallowed hard. If only she knew how much those words resonated with him. He, a prince who had run away precisely to have the right to choose. Malik, observing his increasingly enchanted friend, couldn't help but warn him. "Be careful, Zuberi. The closer you get, the harder it'll be to tell her the truth."
"I know, but I can't push her away. It's like I'm starting to understand who I am through her." His friendship with Rachel grew naturally. She taught him how to get by in New York, how to deal with difficult customers, how to take night buses without getting mugged, and he, in turn, made her laugh in a way she didn't even remember was possible. Sometimes he'd bring her simple flowers wrapped in a napkin. Other times he'd bring a dessert from the cafeteria, hidden in his apron pocket. They were silly gestures, small, but full of intention. And with every shared laugh, every conversation in the alley behind the diner, Zuberi's heart beat faster. But with the feeling also came fear, because that apartment, that broom, that fast food uniform, were all part of a character he created, a Zach that didn't exist. And with every step he took towards true love, he felt the chasm between his lie and Rachel's reality widening. Still, he clung to the hope that, perhaps, when the truth came out, she would see not the prince or the pauper, but the man he was becoming. And that night, finishing sweeping the floor of the small apartment, Zuberi looked out the window and whispered, "May this simple dream last a little longer." Little did he know that fate was about to test everything he believed. When eyes meet, the first encounter with Rachel. It was an ordinary Wednesday, the kind of day where the sky looks tired, the sidewalks exhale smoke, and the diner customers are even more impatient than usual. Zuberi, his uniform's red cap pulled down over his ears, was on his 3rd consecutive shift cleaning tables and balancing greasy trays. Between orders, he heard a soft yet firm voice coming from the counter. "You forgot this." He turned quickly. His eyes met hers, large, brown, with a mixture of exhaustion and tenderness. Rachel extended the small notebook he had dropped minutes earlier. "Thank you," he said, a little awkwardly, wiping his hands on his apron. "Rachel,
she introduced herself, with a shy but direct smile. Zub. He paused for a moment, remembering he needed to maintain the facade. Zach. My name is Zach. She nodded. Welcome to the jungle, Zach. Here, you either learn fast or you become part of the furniture. Zuberi let out a genuine laugh, perhaps for the first time in days. Something about her intrigued him. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wore no makeup, didn't flirt, didn't hide her tiredness, and yet she possessed a serene and unapproachable beauty, as if life had sculpted every feature of her with intention.
Over time, their encounters became constant, always brief, between orders and shift changes. But there was something special in every exchanged glance. When Zuberi passed her in the narrow kitchen corridor, their shoulders touched, and his heart raced. When she laughed at some silly thing he said, he felt as if he had conquered an entire army. Malik noticed the change in his friend. "It's getting harder and harder to pretend you're just a simple Zach, isn't it?" he teased, as they swept the diner floor after closing. Zuberi sighed, leaning against the wall. "She's different. She's not after status, money, any of that. She just wants someone who is truly there." Rachel, in turn, also began to notice something in Zach that she didn't see in others. He was overly polite, kind in an almost old-fashioned way. He had a curious gaze, like someone seeing everything for the first time, even the most mundane things. And, above all, he seemed to listen to her with true attention, the kind of listening that made her feel important. One night, they got stuck in the diner during a torrential downpour. The electricity went out, the customers had already left, and the few remaining employees were trapped, waiting for the storm to pass. Rachel and Zuberi sat in the back on top of soda crates. She was wet from the waist down. He, feeling cold, extended his thin jacket to her. "Are you always like this?" she asked, with an investigative look. "Like what?" "Polite, thoughtful, mysterious." She smiled. "Like a Prince Charming disguised as a diner employee." Zuberi swallowed hard. The irony of the phrase almost stung. "Maybe just someone trying to find himself," he replied, looking away. They sat in silence for a few seconds, listening to the rain beating on the tin roof. It was there, between the sound of the drops and the smell of cold French fries, that their feelings truly began to take root. Zuberi was increasingly certain. He wasn't just liking her, he was falling in love. But with every step towards Rachel's heart, fear grew inside him. Because the castle he left behind might have been far away, but the secret he carried was more present than ever. Hearts under construction and secrets in silence. Days in New York seemed to pass in slow motion, yet also slipped through his fingers. Zuberi, now accustomed to being just Zach, lived a routine he never imagined. He woke early, swept the small apartment, prepared coffee with Malik, who still complained about the taste of American bread, and headed for another shift at the diner. But something had changed. Now the routine had color, it had sparkle, it had purpose, and the reason had a name: Rachel. She was his first thought upon waking, and his last before sleeping. Every conversation, every gesture from her seemed simple, but left a trail that Zuberi couldn't ignore. He started noticing small things: how her brow furrowed when she was concentrating, how her laughter escaped unfiltered when surprised, or how she hid her tiredness so as not to worry anyone. Rachel, on the other hand, also felt a growing connection. Zach was different from others. He had gentle manners, a curious gaze, and a posture that at times seemed too refined for someone cleaning tables. But she didn't question it. In fact, she liked the silent mystery that surrounded him. Between milkshake orders and greasy trays, the two grew closer.
They shared lunch breaks, left the diner together, and sometimes took a walk around the block just to stretch their legs and their time together. But as his heart opened, Zuberi's mind closed in on a dilemma. With every smile Rachel gave, the weight of the lie he maintained grew heavier. What if she found out? What if, upon learning he was, in fact, a prince from an African kingdom, she rejected him? Or worse, what if she started treating him differently? One night, after an impromptu dinner with diner leftovers, Malik confronted him. "You need to tell her the truth, Zuberi. This isn't just a summer fling. It's getting serious." Zuberi was sitting on the apartment floor, his back against the wall, and a plate of pasta on his lap. "I know, but I'm scared. What we have, it's real. And if I tell her who I am, she might think it was all a game, an act." "And wasn't it?" Malik's question was like a sharp slap. He didn't answer. He just sat there, in silence, staring into space. The next day, Rachel invited Zuberi to help her at a neighborhood community fair. It was a simple event, with food stalls, inflatable toys, and local musical performances. She was coordinating the children's area and needed help with face painting. Zuberi, wearing a colorful apron and holding a brush with blue paint, never imagined he would feel so complete. The children laughed, the residents thanked them, and Rachel looked at him with a sparkle in her eyes that disarmed him. When the event ended, they sat on the curb, watching the sunset paint the sky orange. "You're good at this," she said, lightly leaning her shoulder against his. "Good at what?" In a spontaneous gesture, Zuberi bought a small bouquet of flowers from a street vendor, and the next day left it on the diner counter for Rachel, along with a note written in a trembling hand. "Being a real person." Zuberi smiled, but inside he fought against the guilt that consumed him. He wanted so badly to say, "I'm not who you think I am, but I'm trying to be." But instead, he stayed silent. Because as much as their hearts were being built, the secret between them was an invisible crack, about to become an abyss. And in that silence full of tenderness, Zuberi understood he was at a crossroads. Either he would continue living the comfortable lie, or he would have the courage to reveal the truth, even if it meant losing everything. Sweet like her, a love beyond appearances. As the weeks passed, Zuberi felt his heart increasingly intertwined with the simple yet intense routine alongside Rachel. She was the perfect blend of strength and tenderness, a balance he had never seen before. There was no glamour about the girl, no pretense, just a raw honesty that attracted him in a way he couldn't explain. Rachel woke up early, even when tired, to take care of her younger siblings while her father worked 2 jobs to support the family. She divided her time between nursing studies at night and working at the diner during the day. Zuberi, in turn, was amazed by her courage, facing a hard life without losing her smile. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through a park near the apartment, Rachel stopped in front of a blossoming tree and said, "You know, Zub, life isn't just about grand castles or kings. It's about these small things here, the smell of flowers, the sound of children playing, the sun hitting your skin. That's what keeps me alive." Zuberi looked at her and felt a tightness in his chest. How could someone so simple have a heart so full of strength and wisdom? It was this simplicity he was beginning to value more than any luxury or power a crown could offer. During their conversations throughout the day, Rachel confided her dreams, not of wealth, but of freedom, of being able to choose her path and help others, perhaps as a nurse, to care for those in need. Zuberi, attentively, listened to every word, absorbing her every desire as if it were a life lesson. He realized that what truly mattered wasn't one's origin, but what they carried in their heart. Rachel wasn't impressed by titles or money. She admired character, courage, and kindness. Qualities Zuberi felt growing within himself each day by her side.
"To the sweetest woman I've ever known." She smiled like a child receiving an unexpected gift. From then on, small gestures of affection became part of their daily lives. A coffee brought on a cold morning, a blanket lent on rainy days, a song played on Malik's car radio. But even with all this tenderness growing between the two, Zuberi felt the weight of the secret increasing. He knew his world and Rachel's were on opposite sides of a thin line, a line he feared crossing. One night, after an exhausting shift at the diner, they walked together to the building's rooftop, where the view of the illuminated city seemed to tell silent stories. There, Rachel spoke of her fears, the difficulties of being a young woman trying to establish herself in such a big and impersonal city. Zuberi, in turn, opened up a little, talking about his own dreams and the desire to live a life that was truly his own. Between the city lights and shadows, they grew closer, exchanging a look that spoke more than words. It was a simple moment, but laden with meaning. It didn't matter where they came from. What mattered was what they felt there, in that instant. Zuberi felt for the first time that his heart belonged to something real, not to a title or a distant kingdom, but to a woman who made him want to be better, even without knowing his true identity. But the truth, like a silent shadow, continued to haunt his nights, reminding him that all sweetness could turn bitter if the secret was revealed the wrong way. And so, between simple gestures and shared silences, the Prince of Ngabo learned that the sweetest love is one that goes beyond appearances, and that sometimes, to truly love, one needs the courage to be completely vulnerable. Lies, masks, and the day of truth. Zuberi already felt the weight of his secret like a constant shadow, but he never imagined that the day of truth would arrive so quickly, and so unexpectedly. It all began on a busy Friday at the diner. There was more movement than usual, and amidst the rush, a well-known, curious, and gossipy customer decided to investigate the origin of that Zach, who was so polite and different from the other employees. A quick internet search was enough to bring up an old photo of a young African man, in reality, an official image of Zuberi as the Prince of Ngabo. The customer didn't hesitate before spreading the news to the other patrons, who began to whisper and look at Zuberi differently. The rumor grew quickly, and before he could explain himself, the news reached Rachel's ears. She was closing the diner when she heard a group of people commenting about the disguised prince who worked there. Her face changed. Doubt and confusion filled her eyes. In that moment, Zuberi's heart sank. He knew he had to face the truth. He couldn't run anymore. When Rachel appeared at the small apartment he shared with Malik, Zuberi greeted her with a mix of nervousness and hope. She crossed her arms, not saying a word. "Rachel, he began, but was interrupted. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice firm, but with a hint of sadness. Zuberi sighed, searching for the right words to explain his escape, his fear, and most importantly, the love he felt. "I was afraid of losing you. I was afraid that if you knew who I really am, you would see me differently, like a stranger, or worse, like someone playing with your feelings." Rachel looked at him, her eyes welling up, trying to understand. "I thought you were just an ordinary guy, someone struggling to make a living, not a prince from a kingdom that sounds more like a fairy tale." "I also thought I could just be that," Zuberi admitted. "But I realized it doesn't matter where we're born or what title we have. What matters is who we are when we're together." There was a silence heavy with emotion until Rachel spoke. "You deceived me, Zach. That hurts. Not because you're a prince, but because you didn't trust me."
Zuberi felt the weight of that sentence like a stone, but at the same time, he understood that it was the only way to rebuild trust, by being transparent, without masks. In the following days, Rachel avoided contact. Zuberi felt the emptiness like never before. Malik, worried, tried to cheer him up. "Man, life is full of risks. You threw yourself into this journey and sometimes we fall. But what matters is getting back up." Determined to mend what was broken, Zuberi decided to act. He organized a simple dinner in the apartment, decorated with improvised lights and plastic flowers he bought at the market. He invited Rachel to talk, promising sincerity and respect. When she arrived, nervous and suspicious, he opened his heart. He spoke about the weight of the throne, the family pressure, and the desperate search for a real love. He recalled the simple moments they shared and confessed that none of it would make sense without her. Rachel listened, tears streaming down her face. Wounded pride gave way to understanding. In the end, she gave a faint smile and held his hand. This is a beginning. And in that moment, between mistakes and forgiveness, lies and truths, Zuberi understood that true love is built not only on passion, but on the courage to show oneself vulnerable and human. Between pain and doubt, Rachel breaks up with Zuberi. After the revelation, what seemed like a promising fresh start between Zuberi and Rachel soon faced one of its biggest tests. Despite the sincere apology and the emotional conversation, the wound of distrust was not yet healed. Rachel felt torn. On one hand, she knew Zuberi had a true heart and that his story was full of nuances and complexities she could never have imagined. On the other hand, she felt betrayed by the lie, by the secret kept for so long. How could she fully trust someone who had hidden their own identity? In the days that followed, Rachel pulled away. She avoided meetings and messages, responded coldly, and her presence at the diner, once warm, became distant. For Zuberi, every moment without her was a growing pain, an emptiness that seemed to consume his soul. He tried to get closer, sending messages, small notes, phone calls, but nothing seemed to break the barrier Rachel had built around her heart. The pain of the separation seemed definitive. One afternoon after work, Zuberi found her sitting on a park bench where they used to walk together. She was looking at the ground, her hands nervously intertwined in her lap. "Rachel," he began, his voice choked. She looked up, eyes shining, but filled with sadness. "Zuberi, I need to be honest," she said, taking a deep breath. "I really wanted us to continue, but I don't know if I can forget what happened. Trust is a fragile thing, and I don't know if ours can be rebuilt so easily." He nodded, holding her hands gently. "I understand, and I know I made a mistake. But I don't want to give up on us. I want to prove, every day, that I am worthy of your love." Rachel gave a sad smile. "Sometimes, love isn't enough, Zuberi. Sometimes the wounds are too deep. I need time, and maybe distance." With those words, she stood up and walked away, leaving Zuberi there, heartbroken, but with a faint hope that time could heal. The following days were difficult for him. The work routine seemed empty, the apartment cold and silent. Malik tried to cheer him up, but he knew his friend needed more than words. Then, Zuberi made a difficult decision. He would respect Rachel's space, but he wouldn't stop fighting for the love he felt. He wouldn't give up on showing that, behind the prince, there was a man capable of loving with all the sincerity in the world. With a new purpose, he began to get more involved in the community. He helped at fairs, participated in cleanup drives, and volunteered at the local clinic. He wanted to show that his love wasn't just words, but actions, that he was someone who understood Rachel's reality and was willing to stand by her side, not as a prince, but as a partner. Even with the distance, Zuberi felt that this was a path of growth, not just to win Rachel back, but to find himself as a man. And between pain and doubt, he learned that loving also means knowing how to wait, with patience, respect, and hope. A royal gesture of true love. The silence that had settled between Zuberi and Rachel was a painful echo, an absence that weighed heavily on the heart of the prince who had abandoned his castle to live a simple life. Although time had begun to soften some wounds, doubt still hung in the air. Could what seemed so broken truly be rebuilt? But Zuberi was unwilling to give up. More than ever, he felt he needed to show Rachel how true his love was, and that he was not just a title or a distant story, but a man willing to give up anything to be by her side. It was then that he made a decision that would change both their destinies forever. One sunny morning, he sought out Malik and said, "I need to do something that truly shows who I am and what I'm willing to give up for love." Together they began to plan. Zuberi knew that abdicating the throne was not a simple decision and that his family would never understand. But he didn't want to be a distant king, commanding a people who didn't know him while losing the woman he loved. Days later, at a public event, broadcast to the kingdom and the international community, Zuberi formally announced his renunciation of the title of Crown Prince of Negabo. He stated that he chose to follow his own path, far from palaces and obligations, to seek a life guided by freedom, love, and truth. The news landed like a bomb, shocking his family and the court, but also touching Rachel's heart, who watched the broadcast, deeply moved. When he returned to New York, with renewed courage, he sought Rachel out in person. They sat on the same park bench where they had so often shared their dreams and doubts. "I gave up everything," he confessed, holding her hands, "because I learned that what matters is the love we build, not a title that doesn't define me." Rachel looked at him, tears shining in her eyes.
"That is a royal gesture, Zuberi, more real than any crown could ever be." In that instant, amidst hugs and smiles, what was born was not just a romantic love, but a life partnership built on courage, respect, and truth. The prince who once wanted to escape real life discovered that sometimes you have to make sacrifices to find freedom, and that true love is the most precious crown anyone can wear. From palace to heart, when love is the true crown. Zuberi's journey, the prince who left everything behind, now culminated in what he could never have imagined: a simple, genuine love capable of transforming lives. After abdicating the throne and fully embracing his truth, he discovered that true power lay not in crowns or castles, but in the heart. New York, with its frenetic pace and diversity, was no longer just a strange city to him. It became the setting where Zuberi learned to be human, to connect without masks, and to love with all the intensity his spirit allowed. Alongside Rachel, he experienced days of challenges, triumphs, and discoveries. Between the metropolis's lights and the modest apartment's starry nights, they built a relationship that transcended differences and expectations. Rachel, who once feared that this mysterious man was just another lie, saw in Zuberi the courage to be authentic, to break patterns, and to fight for what truly matters. And he, in turn, learned that the true legacy he would leave to the world would not be a throne or a lineage, but the love he built with her, a love that demanded no titles, sought no status, but was founded on trust, respect, and sincerity. One quiet morning, they walked together through Central Park, observing children playing, street artists, and the constant flow of intersecting lives. Zuberi held Rachel's hand and smiled. Before,
I believed that being a prince meant having everything. Now, I know that having you by my side truly makes me a king." She looked at him, with a sparkle in her eyes, and replied, "And I learned that true royalty lies in those who know how to love and be loved without fear." The past, with its golden halls and formal ceremonies, was left behind. The future, uncertain but promising, was right there, in that shared moment, simple and eternal. And so, the prince who fled destiny found his true place in the world, not in a palace, but in the heart of the woman who, with her love, gave him the greatest crown of all. Because in the end, what truly matters is knowing that love is the only wealth no one can take away.
This story teaches us that sometimes it takes courage to leave everything behind and find yourself. That true love doesn't depend on titles or appearances, but on the sincerity of the heart. And that being true to who we really are can be the most difficult and most liberating step in life. If this story touched your heart, like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this today, and subscribe to the channel for more narratives that inspire and move. Until next time.